This video will give you a brief introduction to differentiated classroom instruction and the strategies I have found to be effective in integrating this pedagogy in my class. My name is Diana Sanchez, and we will be talking about differentiating classroom instruction. I will first talk about what differentiation looks like in the classroom. Secondly, how to follow a protocol for analysis of student work. And lastly, how to make simple assignments designed for your students' needs and progress in a given area. So what exactly is differentiated instruction? Differentiation requires that teachers know their learners. What do they excel in? What do they struggle with? It also requires us to assess the learner in order to measure their progress. Differentiation often involves having to make adjustable assignments that target specific areas in which a student needs more practice or clarification. As educators, we need to question our strategies for supporting students and what we can do to improve in meeting the needs of our students. Lastly, differentiation requires that we approach our individual subject's curriculum with the mindset that everyone learns differently. Teaching only to our average students limits both our own teaching and our students' learning. For teachers and administrators, a useful definition of differentiated instruction is adapting content, process, or product according to a specific student's readiness, interest, and learning profile. In the book, The Differentiated Classroom, Responding to the Needs of All Learners, written by well-known educator Carol Ann Tomlinson, she states, "The goal of a differentiated classroom is maximum student growth and individual success." As schools now exist, our goal is often to bring everyone to grade level or to ensure that everyone masters a prescribed set of skills in a specified length of time. We then measure everyone's progress only against a predetermined standard. Such a goal is sometimes appropriate, and understanding where a child's learning is relative to a benchmark can be useful. However, when an entire class moves forward to study new skills and concepts without any individual adjustments in time or support, some students are doomed to fail. Similarly, classrooms typically contain some students who can demonstrate mastery of grade-level skills and material to be understood before the school year begins, or who could do so in a fraction of the time we would spend teaching them. These learners often receive an A, but that mark is more of an acknowledgement of their advanced starting point relative to grade-level expectations than a reflection of serious personal growth. In a differentiated classroom, the teacher uses grade-level benchmarks as one tool for charting a child's learning path. However, the teacher also carefully charts individual growth. Personal success is measured, at least in part, on individual growth from the learner's starting point, wherever that may be. Now we will move on to part 2. Analyzing student work is the strategy I have found to be the most helpful in transitioning into using differentiated instruction. The protocol for analyzing student work has several steps. First, collect a set of already assessed student work for a performance-based assignment. For example, a written essay, lab report, problem-solving task, or homework. Ideally, this assignment demonstrates the fullest range of performances possible. Be sure to have the assignment guidelines and scoring rubric for this assignment, and consider how this assignment addresses your instructional goals, including relevant standards. The next step is to separate the student work. Student work can be separated based on a variety of rationales that correspond with what students are currently working on. I am a Spanish teacher, and my students have struggled with adjective agreement. I separated my student work based on mastery of this skill and put my students into one of 3 categories: below expectation, at expectation, and exceeding expectation, which I will also refer to as Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. If students were at expectation, it meant that they understood the rules of adjective agreement but forgot to make their adjectives agree 100% of the time. They might have forgotten to make an adjective feminine or needed to change an adjective from singular to plural. If students were below expectation, it meant that they were more unfamiliar with the rules behind adjective agreement and made mistakes more often than they should have. These students might need more clarification and explicit instruction on this particular grammar concept. The last group of students exceeded the expectations by completing the assignment with little to no errors, and can be challenged by having to produce more on their own rather than having all of the work laid out for them. Try to take about 10 minutes or less on this step. You can always reassign a student's work to a different group if need be. Now that the work has been divided, the third step is to reflect on the learning needs of the students within the different groups. Ask questions like, how would you characterize what these students understand and are able to do? Where is their work exemplary? Where are they struggling? Does this set of work samples represent any common misunderstandings? What growth would you expect to see in these students in coming weeks? You will use these questions to help determine how you will implement a lesson or activity that is differentiated. This brings us to step 4, which is part 3 of our video. Identify at least one concrete strategy for addressing the specific learning needs of students in each group. Aim for strategies that can be implemented immediately in an upcoming lesson. Referring back to my previous example, I decided to make a worksheet that helped my students to practice the rules of adjective agreement regarding gender and number. When creating any differentiated material, I always begin with my students that met the expectations, or my Tier 2 students, because these are your average students. In this particular example, these students understand adjective agreement but need more practice simply to master the concept. The objective of all 3 worksheets was for students to take one adjective and make changes to it in order to fit the gender and number of the subjects given, and to recognize the patterns in doing so. The Tier 2 assignment gives students support, but also forces them to review the concept and use background knowledge in order to complete the task. The Tier 2 students are given 4 subjects with names that represent the different subjects we come across in the Spanish language: masculine singular, feminine singular, masculine plural, and feminine plural, which they are able to identify relatively easily. Their adjectives are given in English, so they have to look at their vocabulary words to identify each word in Spanish before modifying the ending of the adjective. Now, I have to consider what parts of the Tier 2 assignment are too difficult or demanding for my Tier 1 students. How can I support them without making it too easy? For my Tier 1 students, I go beyond giving each subject a name, but also identify the gender and number so that when they get to the task, they are able to use this knowledge to determine how the adjective should be modified. In addition, their adjectives were already written in Spanish so they could focus on the task at hand, rather than having to find all the adjectives on their vocabulary list. Another factor that plays into differentiated instruction is timing. When categorizing students as Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3, I also consider how long students typically take on an assignment and what prevents them from completing it effectively. By eliminating a few steps for my Tier 1 students that were created for my Tier 2 students, they are able to concentrate on adjective agreement and complete the task in the same amount of time as the Tier 2 students and the Tier 3 students. Now that I have a Tier 1 and Tier 2 assignment, I can focus on what I can do for my students that continuously exceed the expectations. What is exciting about the Tier 3 students is that you can put more of the work on them, and it gives them freedom to explore the topic in a more student-centered way. For the Tier 3 assignment, I took away a lot of the support that I had for my Tier 1 and 2 students. Instead of giving them a subject name, these students were just given a visual representation of who their subject was. This allowed me to observe how intuitive my students were in using the directions to determine the objective of the assignment. The other element of Tier 3 that differs from the lower levels is that these students were allowed to pick the adjectives they would be modifying based on specific criteria, rather than being given predetermined adjectives. This gives them the opportunity to use what vocabulary they want because they have already mastered the grammar concept. This freedom can become exceptionally motivating for these students, especially when it comes to more creative projects or assessments. You can see the subtle differences between each tier and how even little changes can make a big difference for how well a student can achieve the objective. We now have 3 tiered assignments to implement differentiated instruction. Now that we have created our materials, here are a few things to keep in mind. When implementing a differentiated activity, one concern might be that students will notice they have a different worksheet than someone else and question why. To prevent this, I write my students' names on the sheets ahead of time so that I don't waste time figuring out who gets which worksheet. Label the worksheet so that only you know which level it corresponds with. I use asterisks as a simple way of keeping track of which assignment belongs to a specific tier. You don't always have to start from scratch. Simply take a worksheet or activity you've used before and make adjustments accordingly. Creating differentiated material takes time, so take advantage of what you already have. Keep an ongoing record of the students categorized in each tier. As time goes on, students may need to be moved up or down a level depending on their work. Feel free to even ask for their feedback. Most importantly, see how your students progress. Are they improving? How else can you support them? We should always be analyzing and evaluating our work within the classroom. Thank you for watching my video. These strategies have been extremely helpful to me in using differentiated instruction, and I hope you'll find them useful. Feel free to contact me about questions or concerns.